This is going to be a 20-minute address, so maybe not the most exciting part of the day. You might have set up expectations there. But thanks for that introduction. It was fantastic. And it's great to see so many people in the room. Like when we were thinking about Form-a-Palooza and we thought, who would come to a conference on government forms? I think we were thinking maybe about 5 people. And as it turns out, we've got more than 200 from across 38 different agencies. So that's an incredible turnout. I'm really excited about today. I hope you are as well. And my first design tip, just 30 seconds in, is when you're setting up a team, thinking about your brand, try to imagine the colour of that brand in a polo shirt. I don't think we did that. We've done 2 conferences now, and based off user testing, I'd say we'd probably change the brand colour if we had our time again. But it does stand out. It really is fantastic to see you all here today at Australia's first Form-a-Palooza. You probably weren't aware, but you've just joined a global movement, or at least a mini global movement. Form-a-Palooza was first held in Washington, DC in 2017. It was set up by a friend of Beater's, David Yoakum, who was a founding member of the White House's Social and Behavioural Sciences team. Doesn't exist anymore for some reason. I think there was a change in presidents. And since that first event, it's been rolled out in Philadelphia and Anchorage, Alaska, and now Canberra. So possibly the first time ever that those 4 places have been mentioned in the same sentence. Anchorage actually changed the name of Form-a-Palooza to Letter-Palooza, but I don't think that rolls off the tongue quite as well. So we'd really like to publicly thank David and his team for the idea of Form-a-Palooza and the support that they've offered for this event. We invited David out. He couldn't make it work with his family, but he's provided a whole bunch of support for us behind the scenes. Before going further, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respect to their culture, country and elders, both past and present. And can I extend that acknowledgement and welcome to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are with us here today. All right, so why are we here is probably something that we haven't really focused on yet. Put simply, we want to bring fresh thinking to one of the oldest vestiges of bureaucracy, the government form. Now, I want someone to shout out an answer here, but when do you reckon the first government form appeared? Give me some numbers, people. The year 1000. Anyone else? 0? Yep. Anyone else? It was actually the first written document in recorded history. Because think about it, why would you start writing? You had to keep a record of something. So the first city, what's regarded as the first city in the world in Mesopotamia, in Iraq, Uruk, I think it is called, it was established about 5,000 years ago, and they found little clay tablets there that had a recording of molten barley. I don't know if they were making beer, but it was molten barley, which they had to provide to officials as evidence of like what they were providing. And I just looked this up this morning. This is a late addition to this talk. And in this essay I read, they said clay became the preferred medium for recording bureaucratic items. So like they had a bureaucracy, 120 officials. The 3 most prominent were leader of law, leader of the lambs, and leader of the plough. So like, I'd love to work in the department of the plough. It'd be amazing. So that's a bit of a side issue, but really why forms? Well, despite advances in technology, the form is still the most common touch point that people have with government. In some ways, forms have exploded, and we're only just sort of trying to rein that back in. In fact, it only took me around 10 minutes earlier this week perusing the sites of 3 Commonwealth government departments, Home Affairs, Human Services and Veterans Affairs, to unearth over 1,000 forms that were available on those websites. I stopped counting at 1,000. I've been told there's many more. So forms are everywhere, from applying for a driver's licence, registering to vote, getting a passport, putting your children into childcare, your parents into aged care. We regularly submit information and register our choices through paperwork. And forms permeate all parts of society. So no one can escape forms. People of all ages, individuals, families, businesses, people without a job, people looking for a job, people in a job, people who've retired from their job. Everyone has to fill in forms. And I think we sometimes lose sight of just how important forms are and the impact they can have on those groups of people and on all of us. And I've got a slightly left field example, a personal experience. Around about a year ago, my father came to visit and came down to do some sort of marathon or something. He's a bit of a runner. Got really sick, admitted him to hospital, ended up in emergency and intensive care and then Canberra Hospital. And I was by his bedside and I was really concerned about his health, but I was also observing what was going on around the hospital. And what really struck me was how much time doctors spent with forms. So think about his bedside, had a clipboard with about 30 forms on it. People were regularly coming in and checking it. I corrected the doctors 3 times. They'd not gone through the forms. They were going to give him the wrong medicine. It could have killed him. I mean, it's actually quite serious. And when he was then in hospital, I observed a doctor there, nice young guy, paperwork, sat on a computer which they'd set up in the ward and was just translating it all into a computer. And I was like, this is crazy. This guy's a doctor. So in preparing for this event, I remembered that and I thought I'd check out if there was any research done on this. And I couldn't find any in Australia, but I found some in the US and it's pretty amazing. A study in one of the most reputable medical journals in the US found that for every hour physicians were seeing patients, they spend 2 additional hours on paperwork. So think about that. These are doctors, the most highly trained people in our society. Of every 3 hours doctors could be treating patients and helping people, they spend 2 hours filling in forms, and often in duplicate on paper and then having to enter it online. You know, if medical degrees were based on that reality, more than half of the course would be on learning how to do paperwork. And classes would be things like Introduction to Filling Out Forms, Advanced Form Filling. It sounds like a joke, but that's the reality of being a doctor. Now, I know in the Commonwealth we can probably say that's not one of ours, that's a state responsibility, but we should be thinking about how that kind of stuff applies and the impact it has on people's lives. So I think you're already getting a bit of a sense of why improving government forms is so important, and something I'm going to do now is dig a bit deeper into that. So why should we bother? Why should we take today seriously, and as seriously as we have? If we were at a private sector business conference on form design, I'd get some pretty strange looks if I even suggested we should try to unpack the rationale for improving forms. For businesses, it's a matter of survival and profit. Better form design leads to more satisfied customers, more repeat business, and more money. It might not seem immediately obvious, but I think this is one area where government could learn a lot from business. The most successful businesses, especially those trying to get you to buy something, think a lot about the design of their forms. And they've been drawing on behavioural insights for many years, in fact, early pioneers of the adaptation of behavioural insights. They spend a huge amount of time designing forms, tweaking forms, and testing forms. So why would they do that? It's because they've learned that even subtle changes can make a big and immediate difference. One great example of this is provided by the travel site Expedia. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Expedia. Expedia were getting really frustrated with low conversion rates. People were commencing online booking forms with the intention of making a transaction, but they weren't completing them. And that's hugely frustrating for a business because as a business, the big challenge is to get people to even want to buy something from you. So if you've got them all the way through that, it's virtually like having a marathon hurdle race, and right at the last hurdle, people are tripping up. That's really, really frustrating. So they looked really closely at that data and they tested a variety of tweaks. And the one that made the biggest difference really surprised them. So what happened is when they were coming to the cardholder details page, they asked for the following things: first name, last name, company name, and billing address. That's all they asked for. That seems pretty harmless, right? Does anyone want to hazard a guess as to what was causing the problem? First name, let's have a show of hands. First name. Last name? Company name? Billing address? Most of you nailed it. So the company name was added in. It wasn't even a required field. The required ones were name and address. It turns out visitors got really confused when they saw the company field, even though they didn't have to fill it in. What was happening is that they were putting in their bank name. This led to failed transactions, which led to abandons and lost customers. So just by changing that one field, it led to greater conversion rates and $12 million a year. That story seems pretty far removed from the work that we do and the work of the Commonwealth Government, but I think it offers some really valuable lessons. It's true that agencies rarely have direct competitors from which they're trying to capture market share, and nor do disruptive startups typically emerge to steal customers. Yet the rationale for us to improve forms and the experiences that people have in using those forms is just as powerful. So I'm going to run through 4 reasons why I think improving forms is really, really important for the Commonwealth Government and for all government. Number 1, poor form design is a disservice to the public. Forms are typically the gateway for people to access something they need, and a badly designed form can turn people away from accessing services and opportunities that they're entitled to. Put differently, poor form design has a cost for the public that we serve. Most obviously in the time and effort to complete forms, but it might mean that they don't even get the service that they desperately need. I didn't want to sort of use an Australian example here of where forms had gone wrong. Unfortunately, our cousins over in New Zealand are pretty upfront about this stuff. So I was checking out the New Zealand government's report on improving public services, and they were quite explicit that they could do better when it came to forms. And they weren't shirking from that at all. So I'm going to read out an example from their public service report, which I think captures how you can do a disservice to someone in their time of need. So this is all a direct quote from their report. A mother of 4 has become a victim of domestic violence and urgently needs to pay the rent. Her partner, the main income earner, has been arrested. She's traumatised and has no means to make the payment, so she approaches the Ministry of Social Development for help in her time of need. In New Zealand, a victim of crime wanting access to government support has to be means tested as part of the manual application process. To complete the process, the victim has to provide a range of certified documents. Is this sounding kind of familiar to anyone? Has anyone been through these kinds of processes? The documents that this person who has just suffered from domestic violence and wants help has to provide include proof of identity, proof of dependence, proof of marital status, proof of income, proof of address, and proof of assets or mortgage papers. In total, so she has to gather all of these things up. Most of us don't have this sitting around, so you usually have to contact someone and ask for it. And then in total, she must contact 4 different government agencies and her bank to be able to complete the application for the rent assistance. I think we'd all agree that example, the government is not just failing to provide a good service, it's providing a disservice to someone in their time of need. So they acknowledge they can do better, and I'm sure that we would acknowledge that we could do better as well. Okay, the second reason why I think we should take forms really seriously. Well-designed forms will help build trust in government, which is a big theme and a big concern at the moment. In recent years, satisfaction with government agencies across most countries has been declining. The public has come to measure the level of agency service not against traditional government peers, but against the smooth, personalised and always-on experiences they interact with every day in the private sector. So the bar has been lifted and we have to go with it. If we can, then satisfaction from the public will increase, as will perceptions of government competence. And we know from the work of the OECD that there's a strong positive correlation between satisfaction, competence and trust in government institutions. In other words, repeated good experience with government forms will satisfy the public, build a sense of competence and lead to greater trust. I will add, however, that there's little tolerance for poor service delivery from the public, and that negative experiences leave a lasting scar. In fact, research by global consultancy McKinsey has found that negative customer experiences affect overall customer satisfaction scores 4 times more than a positive one. So one way of thinking about that doesn't kind of directly affect us is thinking about services from Australia Post. How many on-time deliveries of parcels from Australia Post would it take to compensate for them losing one parcel that contains something like a valuable family heirloom? I think you'd mainly be just saying that Australia Post don't do a good job. And it's similar with forms. So there's a very low tolerance for designing forms that don't provide a good service for the public. The third reason why government should take forms seriously is that it will save money and free up resources. Good form design reduces complexity, friction and unnecessary work from customer-facing processes. This leads to less time fielding complaints and inquiries, reduces job complexity, saves the government time and money, allowing limited resources to be allocated elsewhere. And as the Expedia example illustrates, big improvements can be made at low or very low, sometimes no cost. And the good news is we don't need to look too far to see some great leaps forward being made here in the Commonwealth Government as well. The introduction of My Tax at the ATO has made a tremendous impact. And I'm not sure if we've got any ATO people. Is there anyone here from ATO? Well done. I'm sure you personally introduced, you did, I thought so, yep. In 2017, more than 3.5 million people used that service, and 80 million pieces of information were pre-filled into tax returns. It's pretty incredible. Processes like that have resulted into a boost in client satisfaction, volumes and speeds of processing. And one thing that stood out for me is that within 3 years, the number of people that received their tax refunds within 5 days increased from 0 to 75%. So it's only about 3 or 4 years ago, no one got it in within 5 days, now 3/4 of us do. The transformation of the Department of Human Services, and I haven't completely, is it Services Australia or Human Services still? Not sure, let's just say Human Services. It's also really impressive and has made a big dent on the number of forms printed and distributed, falling from 12 million in 2016-17 to 7.5 million in 2017-18. So in 1 year, from 12 million to 7.5 million forms printed and distributed. I think that's really incredible. So I know for sure there's a bunch of DHS people here, so let's have a little wave from all the DHS crew. This is how seriously they take it at DHS, and are starting to show some great results, so really well done. I also noticed on the DHS annual report a process that they simplified which stood out, and I really liked it. It related to the application and claims processes for student payments, and there were some forms, and they reduced the number of questions that students were asked from 117 to 37. And I'm sure there's plenty of other forms where we could do something similar. We're going to hear a little bit more from Rachel later today from DHS, and I look forward to hearing that. Okay, my last reason why we should improve forms and take it seriously is that good form design builds employee engagement and satisfaction. And this is something I think we don't really think about that much. In other words, good form design is good for us, the public service as well. Improving the public's experience can improve employee engagement, and studies have identified a direct link between employee engagement and a positive customer experience. Well-run programs give employers a focus and a common, unifying purpose on the people they're serving. If you don't believe that, and I only found this out earlier this week, and I think it provides proof here, is to look at the ATO itself. The ATO introduced their reinvention program 4 years ago. Since then, their APS census results have showed year-on-year continued improvement in staff engagement, now at the highest level since the survey began, and unplanned leave has fallen for 4 years straight, coinciding directly with the introduction of that agenda. I'm not going to say it's all related, but I think there's some obvious relationship there that when you improve services and the public's happier, that the employees are happier as well. So transformation processes may be hard and will test us, but over the longer term, reducing complexity for the public will also make it easier for us and more rewarding for staff on the front line. So the case is pretty clear that we should be doing something. So what should we do about it? Well, fortunately, we know a fair deal about how people process information and make decisions about how to complete a form based on decades of research from behavioural economists, psychologists, and related communities of practice. I'm not going to provide too many spoilers for the day ahead right now, but I reckon there's a couple of themes or mantras that you might hear throughout the day, and you may have heard them before. The first is make it easy. It sounds kind of obvious, doesn't it? But if it was so obvious, why do we make forms so damn hard for people? One of the fathers of behavioural economics, Nobel Prize winner Richard Thaler, is crystal clear about this. He says in the seminal book Nudge, if we want to get somebody to do something, make it easy for them. It's pretty common sense. So why do we think Amazon patented the one-click buying system and that the best e-commerce sites pre-fill all the information? It's about making it easier. We need to do the same with government forms. The second mantra you might hear today is to put yourself in the shoes of the person filling out the form. It's also pretty obvious. Put yourself in the shoes and the mindset of the user, the person filling out the form. Think about all the steps needed to successfully complete a form. Work out where the barriers, problems, and points of friction are, and find out how to overcome them. As Form-a-Palooza founder David Yoakum put it, similar to an accountant auditing for suspicious financial transactions, you're auditing for steps where you suspect people might get tripped up. Later today, we'll be immersing you in that type of process with 5 real-world forms from DHS, ACCC and DVA, so you'll get to experience some of those kinds of practices. And we want you to take off your public service top hats and put on your member of the public baseball caps. Shout out to the Prime Minister there. In other words, put yourself in the shoes and mindset of the public. In doing so, I reckon you'll discover that what often seems easy, just filling out a piece of paper, is when you break it apart explicitly, often a large sequence of dozens, if not hundreds of steps that have to successfully occur in order for the user to complete a desired action. We're also going to be getting you to think more deeply about how people actually behave in the real world. You'll be getting a bit of a crash course in behavioural economics as part of our World Cafe sessions later today, before we unleash you on the forms. For now, all you need to know is that real people, like us, don't behave like an economics textbook might have you believe. We know from decades of study in behavioural economics and psychology that people are not always self-interested, benefit maximising, cost minimising individuals with stable preferences. Instead, our thinking is subject to insufficient knowledge, feedback and processing capability, which often involves uncertainty and is affected by the context in which we make decisions. So we'll be thinking a lot about the context in which people are filling out forms, for instance. We know our choices are often not the result of careful deliberation. And we'll be observing you when we have the healthy and unhealthy options out there later today. But we are influenced by readily available information in memory and the salient information in the environment. We also live in the moment in that we tend to resist change, are poor predictors of our future behaviour, subject to distorted memory, and are affected by physiological and emotional states. Finally, we know that we are social animals with social preferences, such as those expressed in trust, reciprocity, and fairness, and we are susceptible to social norms. Yep, BI bingo, going off. These factors should be taken into account when thinking about how you design your form, and when done well can make a huge difference. This sort of stuff is the bread and butter work of Peter and the other behavioural insights teams around the public service. So we're going to do our best to run you through some of those concepts today, but if you like what you hear and would like to learn a little bit more, I encourage you to do our e-learning course. And if you can't wait to do the e-learning course, then just track down one of us in these lovely shirts and ask us a question today. All right, I'm nearly done, but to finish, I thought I'd tackle what's likely to be one of the burning questions in the room today. What on earth is a palooza? My lovely wife, who is here today, didn't want to be singled out, but hi. Wondered for several weeks why I've been banging on about an event called Form-a-Palooza. Think about it. I'm not sure if the loser bit was referring to me or not, but I can reveal today that is not the correct interpretation of the name at all. Palooza, I'm happy to let you know, has 2 meanings. The first is it's a large lollipop. The second is that it's an extraordinary thing, person, or event. You can take your pick. I think you know where I'm headed here, though. It's all about the lollipops. No. Why Form-a-Palooza? Well, the working title of Government Paperwork Conference didn't get past the focus group testing. I don't think we would have got everyone here. In fact, I've never had an event where the name has got people more excited before they even just try to work out what it was about. It's like, oh, that sounds so cool. Can't wait to go. It's like, well, you haven't even asked what it's about. Now, I like the idea of doing something a little out of the ordinary, and I'm probably going a bit far, but I'm going to call you guys out for being extraordinary. A small but clearly amazing band of public servants who really care about making it easy for people to get the services they need. Is this how you describe yourself? Yes. Get the services they need when they need it, and in doing so, improve the lives of Australians. So thanks for paloozing with us today. I hope you really enjoy the event, make some friends, and leave with some great new tips and tricks that you can apply and practice when you get back in the office. Thanks a lot.